Lyra stood motionless in the crowded subway station, her slight frame nearly invisible among the rushing humans. To casual observers, she appeared human, pale skin, silver blonde hair, and eyes that shifted between gray and violet depending on the light. But Lyra was far from human. She was an empathian, one of 300 scattered throughout the city. Her kind had lived alongside humans for centuries, undetected and undisturbed, feeding on the emotional energy humans so casually radiated. Anger, frustration, joy, excitement, all were sustenance to her species. The evening rush hour was Lyra's favorite feeding time. Emotions ran high as humans pushed through the final hours of their workday, their feelings spilling into the air like invisible nectar. She closed her eyes, extending her senses beyond physical limitations, and began to feed. A businessman's frustration after a failed meeting, tangy and sharp. A teenager's excitement about a date, effervescent and sweet. A mother's exhaustion, deep and complex. Lyra absorbed them all, letting the emotional energies flow through the specialized receptors beneath her skin. "Quite the buffet today," whispered a voice next to her. Lyra opened her eyes to see Nyx, another empathian, his dark hair and obsidian eyes making him look like a shadow given form. "The usual," Lyra replied with a shrug. "Nothing special." Nyx studied her with concern. "You've been saying that a lot lately. The Council is noticing your diminished collection rates." The Council, 7 elder empathians who governed their small community with rigid efficiency. They monitored feeding patterns, enforced rules against excessive consumption that might harm humans, and most importantly, maintained their secrecy. "I'm meeting my quotas," Lyra said defensively. "Barely," Nyx countered. "And you're avoiding community gatherings. Is something wrong?" Lyra sighed. How could she explain the emptiness she'd been feeling? The sense that something was missing? For an empathian to question their purpose was almost unheard of. "I'm just tired of the same flavors," she finally said. "Surface emotions are so fleeting." Nyx stiffened. "You know deeper emotional connections are forbidden. They're dangerous, Lyra." She knew the histories. Empathians who formed attachments to humans, who fed on deeper emotions like love and profound joy, became unstable. Their physiologies changed. Some even developed emotions of their own, a corruption of their nature that was strictly taboo. "I know the rules," Lyra said quietly. "I'm just saying it all tastes the same after a century." The train arrived, bringing a fresh wave of emotions, relief, impatience, fatigue. Nyx stepped aboard, but Lyra hesitated. "Coming?" he asked. "I'll catch the next one. I need more time to feed." Nyx nodded, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. As the train departed, Lyra exhaled slowly. She hadn't lied, exactly. She did need to feed more. Her restlessness had left her hungry, unsatisfied by the fleeting emotional morsels she collected. She left the station, walking aimlessly through evening streets until a melody caught her attention. Following the sound, she found herself outside a small venue with a poster advertising Elian Marsh, one night only. Through the window, she saw a man on stage, eyes closed as his fingers danced across piano keys. What drew her wasn't his appearance but the emotional energy radiating from him, complex, layered, and unlike anything she'd tasted before. Before she could reconsider, Lyra paid the cover charge and slipped inside, finding a seat in the darkened room. As the music washed over her, she felt something new stir within her, curiosity, yes, but something more. Something dangerous. Elian Marsh's fingers drew emotion from the piano like a master alchemist, transforming simple notes into pure feeling. Lyra sat transfixed in the dimly lit venue, her empathy and senses overwhelmed by the extraordinary emotional resonance emanating from the human on stage. Unlike the fleeting emotional fast food she usually consumed, this was a feast of depth and complexity. Elian played with his eyes closed, his face revealing every nuance of feeling that poured through his music: longing, hope, melancholy, and something else Lyra couldn't quite identify. When the final notes faded, the small audience erupted in applause. Lyra remained still, processing the unfamiliar sensations coursing through her body. The emotional residue of his performance lingered in the air, more satisfying than anything she'd fed on in decades. "First time at one of my shows?" Lyra startled, looking up to find Elian standing before her. The venue had emptied while she sat lost in thought. "Yes," she answered, studying him with curiosity. Up close, he was unremarkable by human standards: average height, lean build, brown hair that fell carelessly across his forehead. But his eyes were extraordinary, deep blue with flecks of gold, and expressive in a way that made Lyra want to look away. "I've never seen someone so affected by my music," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "It's like you were experiencing it differently than everyone else." If only he knew how true that was. "Your performance was nutritious," Lyra said, immediately regretting her strange choice of words. Elian laughed. "That's a new one. Usually I get moving or powerful, but nutritious? I like your perspective." "Lyra," she supplied, finding herself smiling in response to his warmth. "Lyra," he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice. "Like the constellation. It suits you, something celestial about you." Dangerous territory. Empathians were taught to avoid prolonged interactions with individual humans. Feed and move on, that was the rule. Yet Lyra found herself wanting to stay. "What was that last piece?" she asked. "The one that felt like remembering something you've lost but might find again." Elian's expression shifted, surprise and something deeper crossing his features. "That's exactly what I was trying to convey. It's called Echo Memoria, a piece I composed after my father died. He taught me to play." The emotional wave that accompanied his words nearly knocked Lyra back, grief tempered by love, loss softened by cherished memory. She instinctively began to feed but stopped herself, suddenly ashamed of consuming something so personal without permission. "I should go," Lyra said abruptly, standing. "Wait." Elian reached out, not quite touching her. "I'm playing again tomorrow night at Meridian Cafe. It's a more intimate venue. You should come." Against every instinct for self-preservation, Lyra nodded. "Perhaps I will." The Empathian community resided in a converted warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. Inside, the space was transformed into an organic living structure that resembled their original world: walls curved like the inside of shells, bioluminescent lighting that responded to emotional presence, and communal spaces where they could share the emotions they'd harvested. Lyra slipped inside, hoping to reach her quarters unnoticed, but Nyx intercepted her. "The council wants to see you," he said without preamble. "Now?" "Now." The council chamber was a perfect hexagon, with the 7 elders seated in high-backed chairs made from the same pearlescent material as the walls. Elder Vex, the oldest among them at nearly 4 centuries, regarded Lyra with eyes that had long ago shifted from their original color to pure white, a sign of emotional saturation reached only by the most ancient of their kind. "Your feeding patterns have become erratic," Vex stated, her voice melodic despite the accusatory words. "You're seeking specific emotional sources rather than efficient collection." Lyra kept her face neutral. "I'm experimenting with different emotional compositions. Seeking more complex nutrition." Elder Mara leaned forward. "You visited a musical performance tonight. Remained focused on a single human. How did you?" Lyra stopped. "Of course. The council monitored unusual behavior." "We're concerned, Lyra," said Elder Thorn, the youngest council member. "This fascination with deeper emotional experiences is how it begins." "How what begins?" Lyra challenged, though she knew. "Corruption," Vex answered simply. The path to emotional addiction. To becoming like them. The suggestion sent a shiver through Lyra. To become like humans, emotional, vulnerable, dependent, was considered the worst fate an empathian could suffer. I'm simply feeding more selectively, Lyra insisted. Not breaking any laws. The council members exchanged glances, communicating in the subtle energy language only elders could manage. You may go, Vex finally said. But we will be watching more closely, Lyra. For your own protection. As Lyra left the chamber, a resolution formed in her mind. She would see Elian again tomorrow, council be damned. The taste of his emotional depth had awakened something within her, a hunger that the surface emotions of strangers could never satisfy. And deep down, she knew she was already changing. Meridian Cafe was everything the concert hall wasn't: intimate, warm, with fairy lights strung across exposed brick walls and the scent of coffee lingering in the air. Lyra sat at a small table near the makeshift stage, ignoring the warning signals flashing through her mind. 3 weeks had passed since their first encounter. 3 weeks of secret meetings, of listening to Elian play, of conversations that stretched into the night. 3 weeks of feeding on his emotions, not taking them, as she once would have, but experiencing them alongside him. Tonight, Elian played differently. His eyes remained open, often finding hers as his fingers created melodies that seemed to speak directly to her. The small audience faded from Lyra's awareness until only she and Elian existed in a bubble of sound and feeling. When he finished his set and joined her at the table, something had changed in his expression. I wrote that last piece for you, he said without preamble. Lyra felt a strange fluttering sensation in her chest. For me? Why? Because you understand my music in a way no one else does. His fingers brushed against hers on the table. There's something about you, Lyra. Something I can't explain. The touch sent an unfamiliar sensation racing through her body, warm, electric, and terrifying. She pulled her hand away, alarmed. I should go, she whispered. Don't. Elian's voice held a note of pleading. I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like I've been waiting for someone who hears what I'm really saying when I play. And then you appeared. The sincerity in his words wrapped around Lyra like an embrace. What was happening to her? Empathians didn't feel emotions, they consumed them. Yet here she was, experiencing something that seemed to originate within her rather than from outside. Tell me something real about yourself, Elian said. Something you've never told anyone. Lyra hesitated. I'm not like other people. I know. He smiled. That's why I can't stop thinking about you. No, Elian. I mean I'm really not like you. The words trembled on the edge of a dangerous precipice. To tell him would violate the most sacred law of her kind. Instead of responding, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face. The contact sent a shock through Lyra's system, a rush of emotion that seemed to bloom from within rather than flow from him to her. What are you doing to me? She whispered. I think that's my line, he replied, leaning closer. When his lips met hers, Lyra's world exploded into sensation. Colors she'd never seen, feelings she'd never experienced, burst behind her closed eyelids. Energy coursed through her body, different from feeding. This wasn't consumption but creation. Something new forming inside her. She broke away, gasping. I have to go. This time, she didn't wait for his response. She fled the cafe, running until she reached the sanctuary of an empty alleyway where she could process what had happened. Her skin felt different, warmer, more sensitive. She looked down at her hands and saw faint luminescence tracing patterns beneath her skin, patterns that shifted with her racing thoughts. This had never happened before. When she finally returned to the Empathian community, Lyra went straight to her quarters, avoiding contact with others. In the privacy of her room, she examined herself in the mirror. Her eyes, once shifting gray-violet, now contained flecks of blue-gold, like aliens. The patterns beneath her skin continued to glow faintly, especially around her heart. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Come in," she called, quickly pulling on a long-sleeved shirt to hide the changes. The door opened to reveal Elder Thorn, the youngest council member. Unlike the other elders, Thorn had always shown Lyra a measure of understanding. "The council has concerns," Thorn said without preamble. "Your energy signature has changed." Lyra swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Lyra." Thorn's voice was gentle despite the accusation. "I've experienced it too." This confession startled Lyra. "Experienced what?" "The beginning of emotional development." Thorn closed the door and lowered his voice. "Long ago, before I joined the council, I formed a connection with a human. I began to feel, truly feel, emotions of my own." "What happened?" "I ended it before the transformation progressed too far." Sadness tinged his words. "The changes you're experiencing, they're permanent if they continue. You'll become something neither fully empathian nor human." "Is that so terrible?" Lyra whispered. Thorn's expression softened. "The council thinks so. They've been monitoring you. They know about the human, alien." Fear gripped Lyra. "What will they do?" "They've called for an adjudication tomorrow. You must decide, sever all contact with the human and undergo emotional purification, or face exile." After Thorn left, Lyra stood at her window, watching city lights flicker like the luminescence now flowing beneath her skin. For the first time in her long existence, she felt something entirely her own, not borrowed, not consumed, but born within her. She now had a word for it, love. And she knew with sudden clarity that she couldn't let it go. The adjudication chamber pulsed with tense energy as Lyra stood before the council. 7 pairs of eyes, ranging from Vex's milky white to the varied hues of the younger elders, studied her with expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. "Lyra of the third seating," Elder Vex began formally, "you stand accused of emotional corruption through prolonged contact with a specific human. How do you answer?" Lyra raised her chin. The changes in her body had progressed overnight, the luminescent patterns now clearly visible through her pale skin, impossible to hide. "I acknowledge my contact with the human called Elian Marsh," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Direct admission was rare in adjudications. "And do you acknowledge that this contact has initiated a transformation?" Elder Mara asked, gesturing to Lyra's glowing skin. "I do." More murmurs, louder this time. Nick stood at the back of the chamber, his expression torn between concern and betrayal. "The law is clear," said Elder Vex. "When an empathian begins emotional transformation, they must either undergo purification or face exile. The choice is yours, Lyra." Purification. The word sent chills through her. The process would strip away not just her new emotions but also much of her memory, including everything about Elian. She would return to being a perfect empathian, efficient, detached, empty. "Before I choose," Lyra said, "I wish to understand why we fear this transformation so deeply. What harm comes from feeling?" Elder Vex's expression hardened. "You speak from corruption. The emotions cloud your judgment." "Perhaps they clarify it," Lyra countered. "Our histories speak of the danger of attachment, yet none can explain exactly what that danger is." Elder Thorn shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. "The danger," Elder Vex said coldly, "is before us. Look at yourself, Lyra. Your physiology is changing. You're becoming unstable, unpredictable. You challenge our most sacred laws. What greater proof is needed?" "That's circular reasoning," Lyra said. "We fear change because it's different, not because it's harmful. Enough. Elder Vex rose from her seat. Your corruption spreads with every word. Make your choice now, purification or exile. Lyra looked around the chamber at the faces of her community, the only family she had known for over a century. They stared back with expressions ranging from fear to pity. What if there's another way? She asked quietly. What if these changes aren't corruption but evolution? There is no other way, Elder Vex said. Choose. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the unfamiliar emotions swirling within her, love for Elian, sadness at the rejection she faced, fear of the unknown, but also hope. Above all, hope. I choose exile, she said clearly. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. Exile was rarely chosen, most Empathians submitted to purification when faced with the alternative of losing their community forever. So be it, Elder Vex said, her voice heavy with finality. You have until dawn to gather your possessions and leave. After that, you will be prohibited from returning to any Empathian community worldwide. Your name will be struck from our records. You will be forgotten, added Elder Mara somberly. As the adjudication concluded, Nyx approached Lyra, pain evident in his eyes. Why? He asked simply. Because I've found something worth losing everything for, she answered. A human who will live a fraction of your lifespan? Who can never truly understand what you are? Lyra looked down at her glowing hands. Perhaps I'm becoming something new, something that can bridge both worlds. Or something that belongs in neither, Nyx countered sadly. Goodbye, Lyra. I hope your choice brings you peace. As she packed her few personal belongings, Elder Thorn visited her quarters one last time. There are others, he said quietly. Others? Empathians who chose as you did. Who underwent the transformation completely. His eyes held a secret knowledge. They call themselves the Resonant. They live among humans, experiencing emotions fully while retaining their empathian abilities. Hope sparked within Lyra. How do I find them? I cannot tell you directly, I'm bound by council oaths. Thorn pressed a small crystal into her palm. But when you're with your human, when the emotion you call love is strongest, hold this. It will show you the way. Why are you helping me? Thorn's expression turned wistful. Because centuries ago, I made the wrong choice. I've regretted it every day since. At dawn, Lyra walked away from the only community she had ever known, her skin pulsing with light that matched the rhythm of her newly awakened heart. She had lost her people, her history, her identity. But as she made her way to Elian's apartment, the weight of uncertainty was balanced by the lightness of anticipation. She was about to take the most human of actions, a leap of faith. Rain fell in gentle sheets as Lyra stood outside Elian's apartment building, gathering her courage. Her luminescent patterns glowed more intensely now, visible even through her clothing. She had no way to hide what she was becoming, no way to ease him into the impossible truth. She pressed the buzzer. When Elian opened his door, his expression shifted from surprise to joy to concern in rapid succession. Lyra? What's wrong? You're... His words faltered as he noticed the light emanating from her skin. You're glowing. I need to tell you something, she said. May I come in? Inside his modest apartment, with its walls covered in musical notation and shelves overflowing with books, Lyra stood in the center of the living room, trembling. I'm not human, she began simply. Elian's expression remained open, curious rather than frightened. What do you mean? My kind, we're called Empathians. We feed on human emotions. We've lived among you for centuries, undetected. The words tumbled out as she explained her nature, her former life, and her exile. When she finished, Elian was silent for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected, he laughed. I knew there was something extraordinary about you, he said, stepping closer. From the first moment at my concert, the way you experienced my music, it was like you were feeding on it. Now I understand you literally were. You're not afraid? Should I be? His eyes studied the patterns of light beneath her skin with fascination rather than fear. I don't know, she admitted. This has never happened before. I'm changing because of what I feel for you. My people consider it corruption. Elian's hand reached out, hovering just above her luminescent skin. May I? She nodded, and when his fingers traced the patterns of light, both gasped at the intensity of the connection. It wasn't like feeding, this was reciprocal, an exchange rather than consumption. I love you, he said simply. Whatever you are, whatever you're becoming, I love you. The words unleashed a wave of emotion so powerful that Lyra's entire body flared with light. She remembered the crystal Elder Thorn had given her and pulled it from her pocket. There are others like me, she explained. Empathians who chose this path. This might lead us to them. As her fingers closed around the crystal while Elian's hand remained on her skin, the small object began to glow in harmony with her own luminescence. An image formed in her mind, a location, coordinates, a place where others waited. I see them, she whispered. The resonant. Elian's eyes widened. Let me come with you. Are you sure? My world has rejected me. I don't even know what I'm becoming. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. His certainty warmed her. My music has always been searching for something. I think it was searching for you. The coordinates led them to a secluded valley 3 hours from the city, where a small community had established itself away from both human and empathian scrutiny. As Lyra and Elian approached, figures emerged from elegant structures that blended harmoniously with the natural landscape. These beings were clearly neither fully human nor fully empathian. Their skin held the same luminescent patterns as Lyra's, but more elaborate, more developed. Their eyes contained swirls of color that shifted with their emotions. A woman stepped forward, her presence radiating a calm wisdom. I am Arya, Elder of the Resonant. We've been expecting you, Lyra. How do you know my name? Those of us who undergo the transformation develop new abilities. Some can sense when another begins the journey. Arya smiled at Elian. And you've brought your catalyst. Is that what he is to me? Lyra asked. He is much more. A catalyst merely triggers change. Your human has become part of your transformation. Arya gestured for them to follow her. Come. There's much to explain. Inside Arya's home, they learned the truth that the Empathian Council had suppressed for millennia, that their species had once been capable of both consuming and generating emotions. That they had deliberately evolved away from emotional experience, considering it a weakness, until they became the detached feeders that Lyra had always known. The transformation you're experiencing isn't corruption but restoration, Arya explained. A return to our original nature, one that can both give and receive emotional energy. But why did it happen to me? Lyra asked. It happens only when an empathian forms a genuine bond with a human based on love, the most powerful emotional energy. Arya's gaze shifted to Elian. And not just any human can catalyze this change. Only those with exceptional emotional depth. Elian squeezed Lyra's hand. What happens now? Will she become like you? Her transformation is already more accelerated than most, Arya observed. Within months, she'll develop the ability to not just consume emotions but to generate and project them. To share feelings rather than simply absorb them. The implication stunned Lyra. I could help Elian experience emotions as I do. And more, Arya confirmed. The bond between you will create something new, a resonance that amplifies both your experiences. That night, as they settled into quarters provided by the community, Elian held Lyra close, his composer's mind already hearing the music their story would inspire. Are you afraid? He asked. No, she answered honestly. For the first time, I feel complete. His lips met hers, and this time she didn't pull away. The kiss deepened, and with it, the luminescence beneath her skin intensified, enveloping them both in a cocoon of light. As clothing gave way to skin against skin, Lyra discovered another aspect of her transformation, the ability to share the pleasure she felt. Each caress created waves of sensation that flowed between them, each kiss generated colors that swirled in the air around them. Their bodies moved together in a rhythm as ancient as time yet new to Lyra, giving and receiving, ebbing and flowing. When they reached the height of passion together, the energy that burst forth was so powerful that every resonant in the community felt its echo. Afterward, as Elian slept in her arms, Lyra marveled at how far she had come from the detached feeder who had stood in a subway station, consuming emotional scraps. She had lost her past but gained a future. She had been exiled from one community but welcomed into another. Most importantly, she had discovered that the emotion her people had feared most, love, was not their weakness but their salvation. As dawn broke over their new beginning, Lyra realized the truth that would forever change her kind. True sustenance came not from taking emotions but from sharing them. And in that sharing, she had found home.